what I wanted to share with you today is the value and the possibility of bringing contemplative prayer to prisoners. In any work, we need a teacher. I'm a Benedictine monk. I'm here in our international center in France, which we're just starting, a retreat center. And my tradition, it goes back, of course, not just to St. Benedict, but beyond that to the Desert Fathers and Mothers of the 3rd and 4th centuries. Monasticism in the church was a lay movement originally. And one of the great insights of the desert tradition is that the best teacher is experience. So as part of what I'd like to share with you today, I'd like to offer you a way of experiencing. Many of you will be familiar with it, maybe some of you won't, but to experience what I mean by meditation. And then hopefully in our conversation as well, and maybe into the future, we'll have opportunity to see how this, if this, in your view, can be introduced into prisons in a helpful way. I was in prison and you visited me, Jesus says. It's one of the ministries that Jesus very specifically identifies and describes. And the question is, what do we do when we visit them? My first visit to a prison was in the UK. I was brought up in London, was at Wormwood Scrubs. And I used to pass it on my way to school every morning on the number 7 bus. And it had, it looked like a great fortress, mysterious, dark place. And when I finally went into it to visit a meditation group that somebody had started there, it was my first visit into a prison. I was struck by something strangely familiar on the inside. And I thought, why does it feel familiar? And then I thought, actually, it's not unlike a monastery. It was all men. It was organized, very well organized. And I suppose those were the sort of features that made me feel it was somewhat familiar. On the other hand, it was the complete opposite of a monastery. It was a real inversion of what a monastery should be. And but I learned from the prisoners over the years, both in the UK and overseas. I've been into prisons in the Philippines where conditions are unbelievably inhumane, and in the States where they're really not much better. And after every visit that I made to visit meditators or introduce meditation into prison, I felt a strange feeling I had just been in a holy place. And that always struck me as surprising because they don't look very holy, and the quality of the life is not what you would normally call holy. But I had the same feeling, this may be a rather extreme comparison, but I had the same feeling after I visited Auschwitz. And maybe the answer to that feeling of the presence of God in these places of dehumanizing life is that is where God reveals himself in our weakness and in our degradation. God is close to the brokenhearted. So this morning, I'd like to share with you a little bit of the experience that our community has had of introducing and supporting meditation in prisons. First, what do I mean by meditation? I mean not discursive meditation in the sense that it's often used today, meaning, at least in Christian circles, meaning reflection or thinking about God or meditating on something, thinking about something. Of course, that is a essential form of prayer, that we use our mind, we use our imagination, we use our thoughts. We do that when we read scripture. Lectio is, you might say, a discursive kind of meditation. But the kind of meditation I'd like to speak with you about today, and also take a little time to practice with you, if you wish, is the kind of prayer that Jesus describes in the Sermon on the Mount. He embeds his teaching on prayer into that great sermon, that great explanation of his vision of the kingdom and of how we as human beings are meant to relate to God and to each other, to love one another. So what do I mean that his teaching on prayer is really what I mean by meditation? Well, what does he tell us about prayer, first of all? The first thing he says is go into your inner room. He makes a sharp distinction between relying upon external forms of prayer only, and what he is focusing on is another dimension or depth of prayer. And I think it's not unreasonable to think that this kind of prayer that he's describing is the prayer that he practiced above all. So he says, go into your inner room, close the door, and pray to your heavenly Father, the ground of being, we might say, the personal source of being. Pray to your Father in that secret place. It could also be translated as a mysterious place. That the heart of the human being is a very mysterious place. And your heavenly Father, who sees what is done in that mystery, in secret, will reward you. So the first thing he tells us about prayer is personal interiority at the deepest level. The heart, the inner room, is our deepest center. And then he tells us, when you pray, do not go babbling on like the pagans who think that the more they say, the more likely they are to be heard, because your heavenly Father knows what you need before you ask. If that was applied in most of our forms of Christian worship, those forms would be very different and also maybe much more attractive to people. In other words, radically reduce the amount of words, cogitation, thinking that you're doing. And of course, when we think about Christian worship, church worship especially, we normally think of services which are basically wall-to-wall words, maybe beautiful words or beautiful music, but usually lacking in silence. And this second element of his teaching is about silence. Do not go babbling on like the pagans. And he gives us a very different approach to the idea of intercession and petition. Then he tells us, when you pray, do not worry about what you are to eat, what you are to wear. Look at the birds of the air, the lilies of the field. Look at the beauty of nature. Look at the beauty of your own nature. And the teaching here is not a little pat on the back and just saying everything will be okay. This is an instruction on how to pray, to lay aside your worries. Well, when you're starting a new project, like here we're doing at Bonveau, and you've got to raise money and you've got to look after the builders, and there are lots of worries. But the teaching here is to lay them aside for the time of prayer, the specific time of prayer, let's say. And then he says, set your mind on God's kingdom before everything else, and everything else will come to you as well. This is attention. It's a common idea in modern secular spirituality in the form of mindfulness. And what I'm going to be sharing with you about meditation is different from mindfulness, but of course there's a connection. And there are many forms of mindfulness in the Christian tradition which prepare us for this kind of prayer of the heart that Jesus is talking about. But he's telling us that prayer is about attention. The great French mystic and philosopher Simone Weil in the last century actually said that attention is the essence of prayer, and attention purifies. And the last thing that Jesus says, he says many things, but one of the last things in this passage he says about prayer is, be in the present moment. Do not worry about tomorrow, because every day has got enough problems of its own. Be in the moment. So let's put these elements of his teaching on prayer together: interiority, silence, equanimity, calmness of mind, not sitting there just chewing over your anxieties, learning to pay attention, to be single-pointed, and to be still, and being in the present moment. You put those together, and you have what the Christian tradition calls contemplation. Jesus is a teacher of contemplative prayer. The next point, of course, is how do we put that into practice? And I mentioned a few minutes ago the desert tradition of Christianity. It grew up after Christianity started to become an institutional religion in the Roman Empire, and monasticism began as an attempt to remain at the heart of the teaching of the gospel and to live it in a full and pure way. If you just excuse me 1 second, there's a bit of noise outside. Excuse me. Please, keep quiet. Keep quiet. Sorry about that. Not such a contemplative space at the moment here. So these are the essential teachings, and the desert fathers and mothers were very practical people, and it's from them that we received a practical teaching on prayer that enables us to put that teaching of Jesus into practice in a realistic day-to-day kind of way. And this is the practice, the method, the discipline of Christian meditation that I'd like to share with you, and then discuss with you and for you to reflect on whether this is something you can bring into prisons. Basically, the teaching that we get on meditation, which they also called pure prayer, contemplative prayer, prayer of the heart, was to lay aside your thoughts, all thoughts, even good thoughts, even thoughts about God, even thoughts about the scriptures. At the time of meditation, and by the way, meditation, as I'm going to describe it, doesn't replace other forms of prayer. As a monk, I pray in different ways every day, of course. But this is, I think, is a missing dimension certainly in Western Christianity. In Eastern Christianity, of course, hesychasm, the prayer of the heart, has always been acknowledged as an essential core dimension of prayer. But in the West, somehow or other, it slipped away from us, or it became specialized and pushed into monasteries and cloisters. So what the desert teachers tell us is, lay aside your thoughts. That doesn't mean you repress them or you have to fight them, but you simply learn, with this very simple method, to take the attention off your thoughts. Our thoughts are passing through our mind the whole time. Good thoughts, bad thoughts, agitated, fantasies, problems, sadnesses, whatever they are, constantly flowing through our minds. And of course, they can control us. And if you're locked up in a prison, the likelihood of that stream of thought dominating you and controlling you is very high. You can get stuck in that stream of often negative thought. So the teaching they gave was to move from the head to the heart. That's the essential human pilgrimage. And how do we do that? Well, not by thinking, because we're leaving aside thought. Meditation, we could say, in this sense, is not what you think. And to do this, they recommended the simple practice of taking a word or a phrase, sacred word, sacred phrase, a prayer word, a mantra, a meditation word, and repeating it continuously in the mind and heart during the time of your meditation. It's as simple as that. And the easiest people to teach meditation to are children. They get it immediately and they love it. And we put a lot of our time and effort into bringing meditation into schools. Another group that gets it very quickly are people in recovery in the 12-step program. They've hit bottom and they have, it's the first step, isn't it, of the program is to let go of your own being in control. And another group that I found, if we're able to get into the prisons and bring it to them, that responds very well to meditation, are prisoners, because they're also in a situation of great poverty and need. So that's the background to what I would like to share with you. It is challenging to our conventional idea of prayer, but it does actually take us back into the teaching of Jesus on prayer and into the great tradition, the spiritual contemplative tradition of Christianity. Origen in the 2nd century defined prayer in this way. Prayer calms the mind. No, he begins by saying, prayer is one of those things that it is good to do for its own sake. For its own sake. We're sort of created to pray. And then he goes on, however, there are benefits. Prayer calms the mind, reduces sin, and promotes good deeds. It calms the mind, reduces sin, and promotes good deeds. If you think of prayer as a wheel, and the different spokes of the wheel are like the different forms of prayer, then we can put in as many forms of prayer as you wish, and different Christian traditions will emphasize some forms, some spokes more than others. But each of those spokes comes together in the hub of the wheel. And what do we find at the hub of a wheel? Well, you can describe it in different ways. You could say that you find, theologically speaking, you find God. You could say you find the mind of Christ. It reminds us of St. Paul. We do not know how to pray, but the Spirit prays in us, deeper than words. So we could say that we find our way into the prayer of the Spirit. And we could also say that at the center of a wheel if you look at this little image here, at the center of a wheel, you find stillness. And that is what allows the wheel to turn and for you to be able to control the direction in which you're traveling. That stillness at the center is a dynamic stillness. It's not quietism. It's not just relaxation. It is actually the stillness of God. Be still and know that I am God. So, what I'd like to suggest now, before we talk about meditation in prisons, I'd like to just take a few minutes to allow you to have a taste of this kind of prayer, which maybe you have had already. In which case, you'll be pleased to know that you can take a few minutes of meditation in the middle of the talk. So let's just run through it fairly quickly. The first thing we do in meditation is just to be aware that it's not in your head. As I said, it's about moving from the head to the heart. So it's a prayer of the whole person. So your body, it's a very physical, incarnational form of prayer. And of course, we know from medical research that meditation has very significant physical and psychological measurable benefits. And we're perhaps a little more concerned about the fruits of the spirit, but these physical and psychological benefits are, of course, part of that. So the first thing we should look at and be aware of and adjust is our posture. So maybe just, if you like, just take a moment to sit upright, loosen up your shoulders, feel the weight of your body on the chair, your feet on the floor. Relax your shoulders, relax the muscles of your face. Close your eyes lightly. And as a little preparation for meditation, just be aware of your breath. Just pay attention, not to what you're thinking, but just to the passage, the flow of breath, as you breathe in the gift of life. And because it is a gift, you breathe out, you let it go. Coming into the present moment. But as a kind of anchor to hold us there and to take us deeper, we take our word, our mantra, our sacred word. And we could take the name Jesus or the word Abba, for example. The important thing is to stay with the same word during the time of the meditation and to keep repeating it continuously, gently from the beginning to the end. The word I would recommend is the word Maranatha. In the language that Jesus spoke, Aramaic, it's the oldest Christian prayer. It means, "Come, Lord." And one of the advantages is that it's not in our own language, and therefore it doesn't stimulate thought and imagination. Remember, meditation is not what you think. I assume it's not in our own language. I was once in a group of prisoners, and one of them came up to me afterwards and said, "Actually, I'm Palestinian, so this is my language." But for most of us, it isn't. So if you choose this word, say it as 4 syllables: Ma, Ra, Na, Tha. Don't visualize the word, but sound it. Articulate it in your mind and listen to it. Say it gently. Don't get uptight about it. Say it very gently. And you can integrate it with your breathing, if that's comfortable. Just keep returning to it. And when the mind wanders and you start solving problems or having daydreams, just let go of the thought and return to the word. This is the quickest way, I know, into poverty of spirit. So the word again, Maranatha, Ma-ra-na-tha. So let's take a little time to meditate together in silence. Sit as still as you can, because the stillness of body will help to bring you to a stillness of mind and heart. Ma-ra-na-tha. Good. So let's conclude the meditation now. I just got disconnected. Let's conclude the meditation with these words from the Gospel of John. He said, "Peace is my parting gift to you, my own peace, such as the world cannot give. Set your troubled hearts at rest and banish your fears. I've spoken these words to you so that my joy may be in you and your joy may be complete." Good. So please feel free to formulate any comments or questions that you'd like to raise, and we can look at them in a few minutes. I'd just like to say a few words about how I think this way of prayer fits into prison ministry and is really very suited to prison ministry. If prisoners hadn't taught me that they can and do meditate in prison, I wouldn't have believed it. In the same way, it's amazing to see a group of children, normal children in a busy classroom, sit in stillness and silence in the class with each other, with the teacher. Why does it seem so incompatible with prisons to have this sort of contemplative experience or contemplative approach? Well, one, of course, is that prisons are places where you are depersonalized from the very first moment you step in. You're stripped of everything that you're used to being in control of. You are subject, many prisoners have said this to me, one of the worst things about prison is the noise. I think they did a survey in San Quentin prison in the US. 20 feet away from the prison, the noise was 69 decibels, which is the sound of a busy highway. So living in constant noise. A horrible smell, pretty well everywhere. Of course, continuous stress and fear, and being overcrowded. All of this adds up to a very dehumanizing experience. And if meditation has one powerful and immediate result over time, is that it restores our humanity. It heals our humanity, and it restores the sense of human dignity. And when you meet somebody, as I've done, and I'm sure you have done, in prison, in these dehumanizing conditions, who has rediscovered their human dignity and value, it's really a glimpse of the kingdom of God on earth. Meditation can bring peace of mind in the most unpeaceful circumstances. It awakens in us an understanding of liberty of spirit, even though physically your freedom has been taken away, but liberty of spirit cannot be taken away. The evidence is that where meditation is practiced, or any kind of contemplative practice is practiced in prison, there is a reduction in violence and better relationships. Same thing happens in schools, even in inner city schools, with bad records of student behavior or violence. There is a perceptible and fairly quick change in the culture and in the behavior of the people. I think meditation can give hope. I've met some of the most despairing people in my life in prison. And I've also met people who have despaired their way into hope. As I said, it can restore a sense of what it means to be human and to recover one's dignity as a temple of God. And from a religious point of view, I think it completely can change our image of God. I was talking to an American bishop once who's a meditator, and he used to work with the gangs in southern Los Angeles. And the kids used to come to him when they were in real trouble, the police or their parents or police were after them or whatever. And these were kids who had really had the worst possible kind of formation. And he said he was speaking to one guy once who said, and the bishop, well, he was a priest at the time, the priest said to him, have you ever thought of turning to God? And he said, I believe in God, Father. But he said, God doesn't believe in me. And he said, I couldn't go to God. I couldn't turn to God because God knows. But he said to him, well, have you ever tried meditation? And the kid said, nah, not for me. So he said, well, let's try it. So he taught him how to meditate just as we've done now. And they meditated for about 10 minutes in silence and in stillness. And the priest told me, he said, we could have meditated probably for half an hour, but he ended the meditation. And then the kid opened his eyes and looked at the priest. And he said, gee, Father, how did you do that? So it is possible, but the teaching of meditation is not like teaching, a technical skill. It's a transmission of faith and prayer, a transmission of prayer as a gift that is already given to us in our hearts. Meditation that then spreads among prisoners. They speak about it to each other. They form meditation groups or they come to meditation groups. And even though the conditions for meditation may certainly not seem as good as in a monastery, even in the monastery you get noise, but one prisoner told me that in America that the worst part, the most humiliating part of his life were the constant roll calls. Several times a day they'd be dragged out, stood up in military fashion, and the roll call would begin, and it would take, I don't know how long, an hour, half an hour or something. And he said, I just fumed. I just was in a rage during all of this. And then he said, I suddenly realized, because he'd been meditating for a few weeks, he said, well, why do I have to stand here and just fume and rage and put my blood pressure up? Why don't I meditate? So he said he started to meditate. He just began to repeat the mantra during these roll calls. So one of the most important things I think that meditation does is, and all prayer does, all deep prayer does, is to turn loneliness into solitude. Loneliness is the most corrosive and terrible of conditions. And there's an increase of it, both inside of prisons and outside of prisons in our world. And COVID has made us even more aware of the corrosive effects of loneliness and isolation. And what is solitude then? Solitude is the discovery and acceptance of your uniqueness. And meditation is a personal practice. I can't meditate for you, you can't meditate for me, but we can meditate together. I was once in a prison in Scotland, and the prison guard was looking after me and took about 30 of prisoners into a room where we meditated together. And he was sitting by the door, facing me, behind the prisoners. And so I did my little talk, and then we meditated. And at the end of the meditation, normally we try to meditate for 20 minutes. At the end of the meditation, I opened my eyes, and the first thing I saw was the prison guard meditating, not sleeping, but he was meditating with us. And it was a beautiful moment. I'm not sure that he should have been meditating and closing his eyes, but he did. And there was that, so for that moment, the solitude of the meditation had created a oneness, a peace among everybody. And finally, I just want to say a word about the discipline. We teach meditation not as a technique, but as a discipline, which gives us the word disciple, and comes from the word meaning to learn. If you want to learn something, you have to practice a discipline. But a spiritual discipline, or any kind of discipline really, that is going to work and enhance you, has to be freely chosen. It can't be imposed. So in prisons, it's all about imposed discipline and enforced discipline and punishing discipline. Fearful, fear-based discipline. But in meditation, it's the self-discipline that leads to liberty of spirit. So the challenge to me seems to me to get into prisons. They say it's more difficult to get into prisons than it is to get out. And the challenge to me seems to be to get into prisons with this very simple gift and to share it with them and allow them then to share it with each other. Anyway, that's what I'd like to share with you, and be very happy to hear any of your comments or any questions. Yes.
And here is Father Laurence.
I can, yes, I think so.
Hi, good morning.
Yes, I can.
Thank you so much for that. It was lovely. I used to run a Christian meditation group in my prison a few years back now, with two people who came in who are part of the broader Christian meditation movement. And certainly everything you say is very, very true. And I think there are obviously also challenges running these groups in prison. There are challenges. And I think what we found was that one of the things that's very difficult to do is to get the guys up in the morning and out of bed. So I think these groups are best run later on in the day. And the other issue that was sometimes a challenge, so we had to have at least 2 people because we don't have prison officers come in into our groups, was you did get, there's a lot of people in prison who are addicts, drug addicts. Yeah. And at the very, very beginning, when they're first coming off the drugs and they're on medication, they move around a lot, they can't sit still, they find it very difficult to, they physically find it difficult because their heads are all over the place. So it was quite important that if there were 2 of us in the group, one person always had to keep an eye open as to what was happening. So because it was difficult for some of them. They wanted to come, actually, interestingly enough. It was often the addicts who wanted to come because they thought it would be a way of calming them down.
Yeah.
But the question I wanted to ask really was about this time, because these Eileen and Liz, who used to come in, they said that 20 minutes was, if you like, essential to really get into the practice of meditation. And also that, you talked about discipline, that you need to do it every day. And I think a lot of the prisoners found it difficult to do it in their cell because they'd be with a cellmate who had the television on all the time. And so I used to just encourage them to say, well, at least try and do it for 5 minutes, but just do it regularly.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was just the comment on how long you need to do it for in order to be able to, if you like, get into it.
Thank you. Thank you. No, those are very good points. I appreciate them. Yes, I think that with children, for example, we recommend 1 minute per year of their age. So if they're 6 years old, 6 minutes. But it takes time to build up to that, even with children. And in a group of children, you're going to have some who are more attuned to it and others who are a bit more restless. So I think we have to adapt to circumstances. And that's why the person who's introducing it needs to have 2 things. One is a clear idea of the method or the discipline that you are offering them, and the fact that it will take them time to incorporate this personally, and each one will be different. And the other thing is not to to adapt to individual possibilities and external circumstances. So I think the most important thing actually is regularity. I mean, we teach meditation in a business school to MBA students, and these are highly stressed individuals, many of them, and they find it, some of them have no problem, but many of them find it very difficult to do 20 minutes twice a day, which is what we recommend. So I think it's good to have that as a kind of a goal, but also at the same time, the way it's introduced needs to be very friendly and not to make them feel, oh, I can't do this, I'm a failure, I'm not capable of this. So it needs to be introduced in a way that's both realistic and say you need to practice, but at the same time saying be patient and you'll learn from your own experience. So regularity is really important, and whatever is possible in the routine of the prison one would need to adapt to that. And if you can meditate for 20 minutes is completely out of the question most of the time, then just start with what you can do. But I would say set a period of time. So say you were going to say 5 minutes at the beginning, when they're not used to this at all, set 5 minutes and give them that as a goal. And if they've got I don't know, if they've got watches, they can time it as well. And then you could build up to 6 minutes, after a couple of weeks, and to 7 minutes. So there's a sense of something you can measure. It's like doing your 10,000 steps a day. So it's helpful maybe to do that, but certainly to avoid making them feel that it's too much for them, cut the cloth according to the measure. Yeah. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Could you address just there's something that I'm thinking about here. People with ADHD and their brain is wired in a different way, and the racing thoughts, and that can set up, I suppose, a feeling of failure if the thoughts are racing constantly during this meditation. Have you come across this, and can you address it for me?
Thank you. Yes, we have in schools, especially classrooms, but in a number of conferences we've had with psychiatrists and educators and psychologists. The general professional opinion is that meditation helps. It helps, a child or a person with, racing thoughts, because it gives them the possibility, a little taste of being able to be in control, being able to focus, and to have something that isn't a thought as such to focus on, which is the word. So again, it can be introduced as a discipline, but at the same time, in a way, introduce it so that it doesn't give them a feeling of failure, but to say this is how we begin. And I've meditated with people whose minds are just in chaos. They've had some kind of break, and they've told me that what they were able to do was to step back for a few moments from this surge of thought and fantasy and imagery, and just realize that that's going on, but it isn't them. It's like pain, chronic pain. You can accept that the pain is there, but you don't have to identify with it. So I think meditation very gently, and provided it's supported, in a friendly way, and in maybe a challenging way, but in basically a friendly way, I think meditation can give people who are suffering HDD and related conditions a feeling that they can find a point of still awareness in themselves, and that brings them into touch with peace that they didn't have before. But again, little by little, and if they can only do that for 3 or 4, 5 minutes, but not to give up. And if they can only do it for 5 minutes or 2 minutes, and also I think this can also be taught as something that benefits from a regular practice, but can also be used, as it were, in other situations, like when that prisoner I mentioned who was discovered he could meditate during the roll call. And this chimes with the very ancient Christian idea of praying at all times, which is really based upon the idea that it is the Spirit that is praying in us at all times, and we tune into that. But because our minds may be very distracted and agitated and disturbed and wounded, it may take us time to tune into that continuous flow of the Spirit. But even a little taste of it can inspire an attempt to integrate it into daily life. Just a little taste of it makes a big difference.
Thank you. Thank you, Father Laurence, for your words of inspiration this morning. and very grateful for you to join us via the internet.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.